What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the body. But the way I talk about the body, of course, changes. So all the way through, from the beginning to the end, it's going to be important that words don't have fixed meanings. That is to say, they do. You can look them up in a dictionary. But then when you use a word, it adapts itself into the context in which you're using it. So words mean what they mean in the dictionary, but they also mean what they new and freshly mean when you use them. And sometimes how you use a word changes the word a lot, and that's going to happen to the word body. It will also happen to the word implicit, because implicit usually means something that's all formed and it's under there, and all you have to do is dig it up. I'm going to talk about the body across. So plants have body. Living body is what I'm talking about, of course. Plants have living bodies, and so do animals, and so do we. And then there's even a further use of the word body for that implicit consciousness that produces focusing. And I'm going to argue that all the different things that we do, the tissue process, the behaving, the speaking, and the focusing, are all done by this body. And that living is a kind of forming. It's never finished. It's never just whatever is fixed form running off like a machine does. Living is always fresh again. Anything living, I claim, is like that. Anything living is not only whatever it now is, but is its implying further. And anything living is its own implying further. Somebody observing it might get this and that out of it, or might say, oh, it's doing the same thing again. But for the living thing, it is implying its own further. So what happens when something lives? What happens is that the environment, I will call it, the environment occurs into the implying. So there is a bit of precision that I would like to make clear. I'm saying every living thing is an implying. It can occur too, but it's an implying. And the environment occurs into it. It doesn't just occur, it occurs into. It's really quite impossible to tell you verbally like this in a few minutes how this kind of concept is worked out. I have to say that I have a long work, the process model, and 5 other articles, and say this is all worked out. I want to have said enough of this little model so that you can take it with you. I'm saying what happens in a living process always happens into. It happens into an implying that's already there, and it does something to that implying. And I'm going to say one more little thing if I can. Everything that happens, happens into. It happens into the implying of the living thing. The environment happens into the implying. Now, one little bit more. The implying happens into the implying and changes that implying. And what does it imply? Well, some kind of interaction with the environment. So the next implying implies how the environment will come in. And if it comes in that way again, then it will change that implying into a still further implying of the organism's own implying. So you get what I call a process. I could start the other way and say, what's a process? In this sense, the way I'm using it here in this case, the word process means an occurring into an implying in such a way that it carries the implying forward to its own next implying. And what does it imply? The next occurring. If that occurring occurs into it, then it carries that implying further to the next implying. So you get a process. And living things imply not just the next moment, they imply process, their own process. Well, in terms of this being any kind of news, you know it already. You've got a plant there that you've forgotten to water for a week, and it's sitting there, and it doesn't know what to do, and it's just sitting there, and if you don't do anything, it'll die. But it continues as long as it can. It doesn't do all its living. It only does a minimal amount of living that it can manage. And then you give it water. And what happens? Well, you know what happens. All its living process can come on. The water is what it implied the whole time, but not just the water, but this expansion and that growth and that cell and that other cell. And so a whole living process goes off from this little bit of water that you gave it. Because its whole sequence, its whole process, its whole occurring into implying, so the next implying implies the next occurring into its implying, which implies the next occurring into its implying. The whole sequence goes off. Or you've got some water in a little fountain-like thing outside, and when the birds discover that water, what happens? The most wonderful, most complicated process. We call it they take a bath, but actually it's a fantastic dance if you've ever seen it, with the wings fluttering and it's jumping back and forth, and oh my God, what a complicated process a little bit of water can get you. But it isn't just the water, of course. It's that every move that it makes, the environment cooperates in such a way that it can make its next move, which the environment cooperates in such a way that it can make its next move. So there is a kind of perceiving and feeling which happens right in the behaving. The bird doesn't, and we don't, need to have a picture and then say, oh, I see, this is like a map of... but already in moving, we perceive, and the body feels the continuity of its own. I won't even say it feels the continuity of its own. I have to say it the other way. The feel is part of generating the continuity. So if all I communicated is that it can be complicated to talk this way, living is always a fresh process. Any living thing is its own implying, and what occurs into the implying and carries it forward, so that any living thing, if you look at it, you can say there's something going on fresh here. It's not a machine. It's forming. It's forming itself. It's forming its body, or some aspects of its body, freshly now. That's what living is. It's what's going on now. So what I want you to take away here is that living is always a fresh formation. The body is forming itself right now. Your body's sitting there now. And when you come up and say hello to me, it's forming itself further. And when you just sit and think, it's forming itself further. And not just that it's forming itself further, but in the way that I use the word know, I want to say it knows about how it's forming itself further. There is a kind of consciousness that develops that has all this forming in it already. You know who you are, you know your past. You are sitting in this implicit consciousness by being in your body. And the forming of the body is from the cells. All the cells are participating when you walk. And so one thing I want you to take with you is living is always a fresh forming, including thinking and talking and focusing. And this fresh forming is all the way from the cells up. The other thing I wanted you to take with you is that there's always a life forward step. There's always an implying of a further. So when you come up to say hello to me, there's something further. It is not true that there's nothing at the bottom. The implicit life process is at the bottom. And I want to end where I began, which is to say, you can all have this power to create the kind of concept that will say what you want to say. If you allow language to come out freshly, like a body forming, if you allow yourself to use fresh, crazy language, this is where TIE comes from. TIE being this shorthand method of doing just that. Where at the third step we say, well, now look that word that you're using up in the dictionary. Notice that you don't mean that at all. Well, what do you mean? Let's get some fresh language here for how you just wanted to use that word. If you do that, then you will be able to say what you want to say. And the main words that I have changed are body and implicit. The body is freshly forming. The body speaks from the inside. You can feel your own body, and in fact you couldn't move if you didn't feel your body. This body that I'm talking about is certainly not the body we leave here when we die, right? It's not the body we leave here. It's this living body. Yes? Okay, now I stopped somebody from asking a question.